Good morning, church. Last week, we started a new series that we are calling Unprecedented Times. Because we believe that as a church, as a town, as a state, as a country, as a world, we are dealing with unprecedented times. And they're unprecedented because we've never been here before, and we don't know what's coming next. I know it seems like every day, every week, and sometimes even every hour, the news has changed. There's another announcement made that completely changes the world as we know it. And that has really resulted in some emotional whiplash, at least for me. And that emotional whiplash has led to a lot of anxiety about COVID-19 and about the economic implications of what this virus has brought. Last week, we began this series. We talked about that anxiety. We talked about how we have to deal with that by rejoicing in the Lord and by taking things to Him in prayer. And I do believe that that is still the first thing we need to do as we deal with these unprecedented times. We need to remember that God is with us, that He is good, that He will see us through the hurdles that are ahead. I hope you've had a chance this week to take those lists that we made and commit them to prayer. But beyond that, living in these unprecedented times has also brought a lot of other questions about what it means to be God's people in this time. And those other questions can lead to all other kinds of anxiety beyond the initial anxiety of COVID-19. I know one that has stood out for me is the isolation that comes from the need for social distancing. I am an extroverted person. I am passionate about people. And one of the highlights of my week has always been coming to church, to be here with all of you, to see people, to interact with people. And we can't do that right now. And that has been particularly hard, and it has made this question become relevant. What does it mean to be community during unprecedented times? How do we be the community that we know we are called to be when we can't gather? We've never been here before, and we don't know what is coming next. But fortunately for us, the Bible is full of unprecedented times. It is full of stories that teach us and show us and mold us to see how to answer questions like this. How do we be community in unprecedented times? I believe one story that can help us get an answer to that question is the story of Ruth, chapter 1. So as we get to this chapter, and I go ahead and grab a Bible and turn to Ruth, one of you, if you have one near you. As we move through this short chapter, we're going to see an answer to that question. How do we be community when we can't gather? And if you're not familiar with the story of Ruth, it centers on a woman named Naomi and her daughter-in-law, Ruth. And the story begins with Naomi and her husband and their two sons living in the time of the judges in the city of Bethlehem in Judea. And a famine strikes the land, and it forces them to leave Judea and move to the region of Moab. And it is there in Moab that Naomi's sons marry two Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. And it is here where we see their story begin to become unprecedented. Ruth chapter 1, verses 3 through 5 says this. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her two sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah, the other named Ruth. And they lived there about 10 years. Both Mahlon and Chilion also died. And Naomi was left without her two sons and her husband. The famine was terrible, But what happened to Naomi in Moab truly made her life unprecedented. She lost not only her husband, she lost also both of her sons. She was in serious trouble now. Naomi was an older woman living in ancient Palestine. She could not own land. Land must be passed through the male line. She could not remarry. She was too old. Naomi's only way forward in life was to return to Judea and beg, hoping that out of the goodness of their hearts, others would provide for her needs. And it is here, in the middle of these unprecedented times, that we will see how Naomi and Ruth both teach us what it means to be community, both when we can gather and when we can't. And this begins with Naomi's response to her daughter-in-laws, following her decision to return home to Judea. Look at verse 8 with me. Then Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness, as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons? Who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." Naomi in those verses teaches us the first lesson of community in unprecedented times. And that is this: she is willing to see the needs of others above her own. She feels abandoned by God and left with nothing. Naomi feels that all hope for her is lost. She cannot remarry, she cannot own land, but her daughters-in-laws, they have hope. They have a way forward. They are still young. If they return home to their father's households, perhaps they could be remarried. They for sure would be taken care of by their fathers. They have a way forward in life. But Naomi, in her own pain, sees above that and sees their future and offers that to them, encourages them to pursue after it. She feels like she's gotten the raw end of the deal. Maybe you feel like you have, in the middle of this crisis, gotten the raw end of the deal. It would be easy for her to focus on her own plight, but she doesn't. She sees outside of herself and looks to the interests of others. This is exactly the first step in being community that we must take. In unprecedented times, it can be easy to focus only on what we need, what we want, and what's going to benefit us and our family. To be community in this time, we must fight that urge. We must fight the urge to believe that our personal response to the current crisis is the only right response to the current crisis. We must do that we all can to avoid shutting down other people's opinions and concerns. We cannot, in our fear, resort to believing that anyone who does not share our views or our fears or our concerns is stupid or irrational or means us harm. We must get outside of our fears about this current time. We must get outside of our fears about the future, outside of our fears about the present, and see the needs and concerns of others as greater than our own needs and concerns. Rather than calling anyone who disagrees with us stupid or irrational or villainous, We must see them with empathy and seek to understand why and how they arrived where they are. Chances are they're motivated by different fears than us. Now, it's a hard task to be sure, but it's also the call that is placed upon us when we become Christians. Philippians 2:4 says, "Let each of you look not to your own interests, but to the interests of others." Here, Paul reminds us that our commitment as Christians is to love our neighbor as ourselves. Doing that requires that we see the interests of others above our own. A common phrase I've heard through this crisis is that we're all in this together. Maybe at the beginning we were. But unfortunately, I don't believe that's true anymore. This crisis has been politicized, and the world has drawn clear lines about which fear you should be most concerned with depending on where you fall on the political spectrum. As Christians, we must avoid that kind of tribalism and division. Our call is to see everyone, no matter who they are or what they believe, as greater than ourselves. Their fears, their needs, their hurts must motivate us the same way Naomi was motivated by the needs of her daughter-in-law. Step one in having true community, step one in being the church minus this building, is remembering that we must see the needs of others above our own. It is not our ability to be near one another that makes us a community, but our desire to love one another above ourselves. But it's not just enough to see the needs of others. It's not just enough to give mental sympathy to the other side of the argument. That's just step one. That's just removing our blinders enough to see where and how God might be calling us to be his hands and feet, even in this unprecedented time. And to see where there might be more for us to do in being a real community during this time, we have to look at how Ruth responds to Naomi. Ruth 1:14-17 says, "At this they wept aloud again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. But Ruth clung to her. 'Look,' said Naomi, 'your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her.' But Ruth replied, 'Don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. There I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates me from you.'" Wow. What a powerful response Ruth offers to Naomi. Ruth takes the second step in being a community during these times. She not only sees the need of Naomi, but she puts skin in the game. Where you go, I will go. Where you die, I will die. Your God will be my God. There I will be buried. She is willing to lay down her security. She is willing to put her lot in with Naomi. Naomi, the woman who has no future, the woman whose only future is to beg. Ruth is going to stick by her side. She had a way forward following her husband's death. She could return home to her father's household. There she would be provided for. There she might even possibly be remarried. But she sets aside the certainty of that future for the uncertainty of Naomi's future. She lays down her security for the sake of another. She puts aside what will be best for her in order to do what will be best for Naomi. She put to death her own security and needs. And that is exactly what we must all strive to do during this time if we want to be a dynamic church during this crisis. We must be willing to lay down our security. And that's a hard thing to do because it looks really different for different people during this time. For some, their security is going to be found in a paycheck, in a job, in a business that they fear losing. For others, though, security might be their ability to stay home, to keep their family safe and protected and in a bubble where there are no viruses. Still, for others, security in this time might be found in an idea that there are certain rights that cannot and should not be taken from you. We all have places where we find our security. And we're all going to be asked to lay that down for the sake of others, in order to meet the needs of our neighbors, and thereby proclaim the name of Jesus. For some, your act of laying down security might just be staying home, even though you feel like it violates your rights or threatens your income to do so. For others, laying down your security might be engaging in serving the community, even though it puts your family at risk. Every worker who's putting themselves at risk as a doctor, a nurse, a daycare worker, a food provider, they are laying down the security of their family to serve the community and to provide what is needed. But church, maybe you're not in that category. It may not stop with them. Any one of us at any time could be asked to serve. Any one of us at any time could find ourselves in a situation where we have a choice. Do I want to stay safe? Do I want to help? I recently had this happen to me. Last week, we had our septic system begin backing up. Wonderful timing for something like that to happen. And so we call a plumber and get him out there to look at things. And when he first arrives, we're careful to maintain the 6 feet of distance and to do the things that we know we're supposed to do during this time to help prevent the spread. And the plumber checks out some things in the house, and he eventually works his way outside, and I'm in the house just waiting for him. And he's outside for 10, 15 minutes, and my phone rings, and I answer it, and it's our plumber. And he says, "Can you come outside and help me real quick?" "Oh, yeah, sure." So I come out of the house, and I find our plumber by our septic system, holding on for dear life to our septic lid. Just this 80-pound-plus concrete lid, and he's holding on to it with nothing but his arm strength. Our plumber had been inspecting our septic tank, and as he went to place the lid back on the tank, the lid slipped inside and got caught. Our plumber's holding on to it with all that he has, and he says, "Can you help me get this lid back out? It's stuck." And in a matter of minutes, social distancing was out the window because he and I were right on top of each other, heaving on this lid, pulling on this lid, breathing all over each other, trying to get this lid back out. And in the midst of our struggle, my plumber, his day gets worse because he accidentally kicks his cell phone inside of our septic tank. And so here we are, holding on to this concrete slab with nothing but our arms. His phone is down in the septic tank, and After 20 minutes, both of our arms are just exhausted. We've got nothing left, no strength left in our arms at all. And we finally have to just give up and let the tank lid go into the septic tank. Now, I had a choice at that moment. I could have been angry. I could have been upset. I could have yelled at him for losing the lid of our septic tank. It's gone forever. Or I had a choice to try and be Jesus to that man. He was frustrated. He was embarrassed. He'd hurt his back. He'd lost his phone. And I'm glad on that day I chose the second option. I was able, over the course of the next couple of hours, to spend significant time talking to him, helping him call his boss, contact his cell phone provider, and even gifting him an old cell phone to help get him through in the meantime. I don't share that story to highlight myself. I very easily could have chosen option one, and maybe on a different day I would have. I share it because had I not been willing to lay down the security of distancing in that moment, I may well have missed an opportunity to help that man and hopefully show him a little bit of what it means to be a Christian. Proverbs 3:27 says, "Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, when it is in your power to act." Now, please hear me. I am not saying that we should ignore social distancing flippantly or out of an act of rebellion. I'm saying that all of us must be prepared to lay down whatever we find our security in, because in doing so, we become the church community God has called us to be. Because when we do that, we display God's kingdom. When we do that, we are God's hands and feet. That may mean laying down our right to our income. That may mean breaking what is considered safe in order to help someone in need or to do our duty to the community. The heart of Christian community is a willingness to put others above self. John 15:12-13 illustrates this well. It says, "My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friend." Here Jesus says it simply. Lay down your life. Lay down your wants. Lay down your security. This is love. This is what it means to be a community for one another in unprecedented times. First, we need to see the needs of others above our own. Take off the blinders of our own situation. Then we lay down that security for their others' sake. That's what Ruth does for Naomi, and it's what Naomi does for Ruth. And we don't need a building for that. We don't need to shake hands for that. We don't need to give hugs for that. We just need to be intentional and on the lookout for how God is calling us to sacrificially love our neighbor. This idea can be communicated by a Hebrew word that cannot be easily translated into English, and that word is Chesed. And it means obligation to the community. One source translated it as a loving covenant obligation to one another. And that perfectly describes what Ruth and Naomi had. I love that idea. I love that as a church motto. No matter the crisis, in our very guts as Christians should be that idea of Chesed, loving covenant commitment to one another. Church, we may not be able to meet in a building. We may not be able to see each other or hug each other the way we want to. But we are the people of God. And we are bound by a covenant of love for one another. And that is what directs our actions, not our fear, not our wants, not our desires. That Chesed is what moves us to see beyond our own fears and moves us to boldly lay down our own security for the sake of one another. Chesed is the glue that holds Christian community together. At the core of who we are is a commitment to one another that transcends unprecedented times. We've never been here before, and we don't know what's coming next. But we do know this. We will get there together. Because in this place, in this community, at Duplain Church of Christ, we are bound by Chesed. We are bound by a loving covenant obligation to one another. So we put our brothers and sisters first. We die to self for their sake. The reformer Martin Luther wrote an excellent response to a fellow pastor, Reverend Dr. John Hess, on responding to the Black Plague during his life. Listen to what he says. And I believe in his words we too will find the principle of Chesed. He says, I shall ask God mercifully to protect us. Then I shall fumigate, help purify the air, administer medicine, and take it. I shall avoid places and persons where my presence is not needed in order not to become contaminated, and thus perchance inflict and pollute others, and so cause their death as a result of my negligence. If God should wish to take me, he will surely find me. And I have done what he has expected of me. And so I am not responsible for either my own death or the death of others. If my neighbor needs me, however, I shall not avoid place or person, but will go freely as stated above. See, this is such a God-fearing faith, because it is neither brash nor foolhardy and does not tempt God. I love how Luther threads that needle of caring for all of his neighbors, no matter their need, in that unprecedented time. He will not go where he is not needed. But when and where he is needed, he will go without fear. That is a community-minded response, born out of an understanding that we are bound in our very guts, in our very soul, bound by a loving covenant obligation to one another. So how do we be a community when we can't gather? We love our neighbor as ourselves, whatever that looks like in our unique context. John 15:12-13 says it simply. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friend. Let's pray. God, we thank you for today. God, we thank you, God, just thank you for the technology that we can do this. But Lord, we thank you that you have given us purpose and meaning in life, Lord, that transcends time, that transcends unprecedented situations. And Lord, that hasn't changed. The reason we gather hasn't changed. And so, Lord, as we go forward into this uncertainty, God, I pray I pray that we would be on the lookout, God, that we would see above our own fears, our own wants, our own desires, to see what our neighbors need. And then, Lord, I pray that you give us the faith and the boldness to do something about it. To put skin in the game, to lay down our security, to help, however we can, those around us. Lord, I pray now that you would bless us as we seek to be your church wherever we live, wherever we work, with whoever we interact with. Lord, I pray now that your kingdom would be displayed in our uncompromising love for others above self. Lord, I pray these things in the name of Jesus.